Greetings, Artie from Artifact Electronics. Here's a box I just got, and it is not from Dell, but it is from eBay. And since the title of the video probably gave it away already, we know what's in there, but the reason I got this is I needed a parts machine. So you may remember I made 2 episodes with this machine. It's working. We tried different options for the floppy drives and all of that, but what remains is that the right caret key is missing. It's broken off, which means that it needs a new switch with the stock in it, and the key top, which is also not there. Also, the top drive, even though it kind of works, it will not read any disks that are not written to by itself. So whether I format it in the lower drive or on a PC drive, a 360K drive or anything else, the top drive refuses to read those disks. I tried adjusting it. My guess was that the track 0 sensor was misaligned, but I aligned it correctly and it still won't read. So there's something more nasty going on in there. And I think I spent about all the time I wanted to spend on that second drive. So I've been on the lookout for a parts machine. Now drives can be found. They'll cost you around $50 shipped and up. But finding a replacement key or an entire keyboard proved to be fruitless. So I looked and finally found what would hopefully be a parts machine. So let's open her up and see what's inside. All right. Okay. And there you go. Just as advertised, I guess. Okay. Well, let me get rid of all the junk, put it on the bench, and see what it does. Now, it was advertised as screen powers up, of course. Screen lights up, but was not tested beyond that. So it was sold as a non-working specimen. Let's find out. Got her out. This thing is kind of heavy. Case looks okay. Got quite a few marks on there. Also near the keyboard. And problem number 1, the reset key gets stuck sometimes. If you hit it on the right side, it seems to jump back. And I knew this already, but the key, what is it? I think it's the plus key from the numeric keypad, is also broken off. Let's verify that. Yes, it's the no, it's the white enter key. So that's gone. But of course, here's the right caret, and it works. Now the keyboard it was obviously wiped down, but you can probably see that things are pretty filthy in between. So this thing stood in the dust for a really long time. but at least I had the decency to wipe it down superficially at least, so as not to ship me all of the dust. We have the drives. Let's see, did they put... Nah, they didn't put anything. They didn't put any drive, any protection in there, like even an old floppy drive. So let's hope that the journey didn't make things worse. Other than that, here's the back. Nothing special. And here's the bottom. Everything seems to be in place. Now, you may have seen the last time that the power switch on this thing is really in an interesting place. Years ago, I bought some test equipment from somebody, and they had a Model 3. And the guy said, I think I bought like $40 worth of stuff from the guy, and the seller told me, look, do you want this? It doesn't work. I said, what's wrong with it? And he says, it won't turn on. And he plugged it in and he kept hitting the reset switch. Said it doesn't work. So I felt bad for the seller, and I pointed out to him, I said, look, the switch is down here. And he looked intrigued for about 4 seconds, and then he said, why don't you take it anyway? I don't want to deal with it. I think I ended up giving him another $10 for that Model 3. But obviously, in a moment of temporary insanity, I like to call it, about 7-8 years ago, I gave away a lot of stuff, and the $10 Model 3 was part of that. But here we are, never to make that mistake again, and now comes time to plug it in. She's plugged into the wall, and this is honest to goodness, I haven't tried it out yet. I'm not going to bring it up with the Variac. I've stated this before. If the seller pretty much tried this thing just before sending it to me, then it's already been given full AC, and whatever damage would happen has already happened. Maybe I should still do it, but I'm too impatient. So for that reason, let's turn it on, and here goes the smoke test. Alright, so the drive is not timing out. Ooh, we got a screen. Now remember, on this one, when there's a disk system and there are no disks, it'll just keep running this forever. So you gotta hit the brake key and the reset button. So either the reset button doesn't work. See if we can adjust things. Well, we can adjust things, but it's not putting anything on the screen. So let's leave it let's just leave it a little brightness, so at least we know if anything's happening. Well, next thing to do would be to put in a disk. Now, we have lots of disks from before, so I'm going to take a TRS-DOS disk. So I'm not sure if the reset key it just popped out, but it didn't make a difference. Nope, nothing happening. So we need to have a look inside. I opened her up, but while doing that, I realized one or two things. The first one was that the disk I used, while it is a TRS-DOS disk, you can see that it says drive 1 TRS-DOS. So remember I told you that these were made on my original Model 3. And remember I told you drive 1 was essentially incompatible with everything else? Well, this one was made on drive 1, it's incompatible with everything else, ergo the drive couldn't read it. So, of course, what do? We get another disk, but first, we're not getting a cassette prompt, which is when we hit the brake key and turned it on, we should get. But it doesn't look like we're getting any of that. So let's try another disk that I know was written on drive 0 on the original one. And I really shouldn't do this because the disk is not going in very smoothly, but I can make many more. And what do you say to that? It came up. So the disk was bad. But while doing this, I found out that most of this keyboard doesn't work. So it wants me to enter the date. Well, the 3 key works for a lot of the keys don't work. As a matter of fact, most of the keys don't work. Including the enter key and including the brake key. Well, the machine looks like it's functional, but we're not going to get much farther than that until we have a working keyboard. So what do we do about that? Magic smoke! It just started doing that. And as you can see, it is clearing up. But obviously something was really unhappy. It all came out of the power supply. And the fuse didn't blow. Well, let's have a look and see why that happened. Well, the smoke has mostly cleared. I have all the windows open, but it's still pretty thick in here. Well, actually it's not thick, it just smells really bad. So let's have a look here. What I immediately noticed was that this cap pretty much blew up and seemed to have burst into flame. And you can see it charred the cap next to it, this guy. But I don't think this guy was at fault. I think this just, it's a 200 and it's basically a line voltage bypass cap. And that is actually one of the common failure modes in power supplies in TRS-80s. Now the big question is, could I have prevented this by using the Variac? And I think the answer is I couldn't have prevented it, but eventually I think that the explosive nature of the failure would have been much reduced if I had brought it up slowly. But I don't know if it would have failed while I was bringing up the voltage. With my luck, it probably wouldn't have failed and sat there for a few minutes at full line voltage and then blown up. So I don't think it really made a difference, but For those of you who keep chiding me for not using the Variac, I'll use it next time. Good enough? Sure. Well, let's take some parts off here, test them, and see if it's only the caps, we can replace them and things should come back, but we're going to have to find out if that took anything else with it or if that cap just shorted. It's still weird that no fuses blew, neither on this board. Well, on this board it makes sense because this fuse is for one of the secondary voltages, but the outlet didn't blow a fuse. Nothing blew a fuse. There was just thick black smoke coming out of it. And so let's take some stuff off of this board. Okay, you can see that I've brought in proper protection here. It's still full. So with that there, of course nothing else is going to happen, hopefully. Here's the guy I removed. Pretty much blew its side clear off and started barfing on the cap next to it. And tested this cap, it was okay. Pretty much all the discoloration just wiped right off. And here's a replacement bypass cap. So with the fire extinguisher at hand, let's see if this is going to work for us. Alright, the cap got replaced. I checked the voltages, plus minus 12 and 5 are all there and within spec. And so what it's doing now, garbage on the screen means that the autonomous display portion of the motherboard, which is basically just dumping the frame buffer contents on the screen, is running because it's refreshing the screen but putting garbage on, which means the processor is not coming up. And doesn't seem to make an effort to read the disk. So maybe we just turned it into a parts machine, finally. Well, it's doing something, but we can see the screen buffer change, so there is an effort being made to write to the screen buffer, but that's about it. Of course, the brake key doesn't work, which we already know, because pressing the brake key and then reset should basically put it into diskless mode and say CAS, prompting for a cassette. But that is not working. So let me sit down and think about this. I spent some time looking for obvious faults, check voltages, AC/DC, couldn't find anything wrong. And then I remembered when I had originally looked at the schematics for this, the way this is set up, the data lines and some of the lower address lines run directly to the keyboard. Now, the original keyboard obviously had a bunch of problems. We could see like, what, 6 keys worked out of all of them or something, so I figured probably the best thing to do was to pull a known working keyboard out of my original Model 3 and see if that made any kind of difference. And of course the easiest test is to boot it up with the brake key held down and see, and it comes up basically saying cassette, which is by pressing the brake key I've disabled the disk subsystem, and it looks like it's working. So then I put a OS, a TRS-80 1.3 disk in here. And it goes through this, that's normal. And then it loads the OS. So now it works. I did the reverse. I put the keyboard to listen to the original, and it didn't prevent it from working, but the keyboard was completely dead on the other one. So obviously I have a bad keyboard, and that's preventing things from working. So now I got to decide, do I want to continue with this one, or should I use it for the purpose of restoring the first one to its former glory, and basically have a whole bunch of spare parts left over? I don't know. Let me think about that. So I spent some time checking everything. There's nothing sinister or conspiratorial going on this board. I checked all the traces. I made the continuity tests on the connector. Everything looked good. So then I tested what should have been the most obvious, and that was the switches. And the switches are bad. Most of them, you say? Yes, believe it or not, whatever made the switches go bad affected almost all of them. And I'll show you what the switch looks like in a minute, but let's just look at the contact, at the closed switch closure resistance on one of the switches that I took out of here. And if I press on it, depending on how hard I press, and what I'm simulating is basically the key top travel here. So let's call it 2K. And I think in anybody's book that's a little bit too high to constitute a short. So then I went ahead and I took the switch out of the original Model 3, which is what of course caused me to go ahead and buy this parts machine. And if we hook this switch up without throwing the spring on the ground again, which I did several times, and it took me a good amount to find them, but if you press this one down with about the same force, I mean, it's changing, but we're getting about 160 some ohms closure resistance on this one versus the 2K we saw on everything coming out of this one. And that's wherein the problem lies. It's just not detecting the key closures. This, unfortunately, doesn't explain why this machine went bananas after it blew the bypass cap and wouldn't boot up anymore. But I don't have an answer for you. I don't know why it did that, but it does work now. And of course you saw it work with the keyboard from the original one. So let's have a look at exactly what goes on in these switches. And, oh well, let's take one from here. So you essentially have a plunger like this. Let's get some more light here. And the plunger has a carbon disc in the middle. And I measured these carbon discs, basically putting the probes on either end of the disc. And I pretty much got about 160 ohms out of them. Both on these discs from the new keyboard, from the parts keyboard, let's call it, as well as from the original keyboard. So all that remains is the inside of the switch, which has two half circles, and when you push down the plunger, the carbon touches those half circles and closes the circuit. However, the way contact is made, and I don't know if you can really see it, but there's these two small protrusions on each, one protrusion on each of the half circles. They're copper colored, whereas the circles are colored silver, so it's a different material. But what I found is that the contact between the carbon and those copper-colored contacts or domes in there is what's causing the high resistance in the parts machine. Now when you go in and you use an abrasive stick, alcohol didn't do anything, but I used an abrasive stick on those copper protrusions in here, and that started bringing the close resistance down. It didn't come down to 160 ohms, but I got it to about 400 ohms. The problem with that is by using an abrasive stick to clean this thing off, I'm getting rid of whatever coating there is on those copper colored bumps. So I'm leaving them open to the elements, and which means that they may work for a short while, but they'll probably go bad again really quickly. So this keyboard is not very useful. Another thing is if I could trust the way I cleaned one of these switches, I could probably go ahead and clean all of them. They all have to be desoldered and pulled out. There's no way. You can see I removed all of the screws that looked like they were holding the PCB to the metal frame, but the way the switches are, they're actually holding the whole thing together. So I would have to remove all of the switch contacts, take them out, use the abrasive stick on them, try to get them cleaned up, put them back again. And that's probably not really in the cards right now, because, as I mentioned, the problem is that cleaning up the protrusions inside here basically exposes them to the elements, whatever the elements are, and may cause failure of all those switches again. So this was exposed to something that caused the switches to fail, or it's a different batch of switches that are more susceptible to corrode by whatever caused them to corrode. Other than that, the board is perfectly fine. I checked all of the traces. There are no shorts. There's nothing going bad here. So the only thing remaining is let's put together the switch and put it back into the original keyboard and make sure that at least we have one good working keyboard. So I put it back together again. The only thing I changed was, remember that the top of the post was broken off, probably when the key top was skewed sideways. And what I did was I took the original switch assembly and took one of the plastic posts from the donor machine and put the switch back together again. And now, with it back together, applying moderate force, we can see that the resistance has dropped below 100 ohms on that one. So let's reinstall this in the original keyboard and test it out with either machine. We can test it with this machine. Okay, I clicked the repaired key contact into place, put the key top on, and looks like the keyboard's whole. Let's boot up this guy and make sure that the keyboard works. This is of course the donor machine, and the reason I'm using the donor machine or the parts machine right now is if this works with the keyboard, at least we can test the drives and pretty much look and make sure that most of the parts in the parts machine are actually working. We know for sure that the keyboard is most likely a loss, a total loss. Well, it's not a total loss. I guess in a pinch I could remove key contacts from it and use the abrasive stick to get the inside cleaned up so the resistance drops low enough to work, but that's never going to be a full keyboard. So let's see. And it's asking for a disk, which we'll give it. And it read the disk. So there you go. It looks like this drive at least is working. Process CPU board's working, disk controller's working, display's working. Pretty much most of the stuff in here is working now, but minus the keyboard, of course. One other problem I detect right now is whenever that cap on the power supply blew, it stressed something, because I can hear slight clicking noises coming from it. They go away when it heats up, which probably implies that one or more of the caps got overstressed in here, and I'm going to need to do a full cap job on that, but then that'll mean that the power supply is also, that we have a good spare in the power supply. And let's do a quick test on drive 2. I don't want to use the drives too much because this machine was so dirty. I need to service the drives before doing deeper tests on them. By servicing, I mean take them apart, clean them, and lube them. But let's see if we can get a directory of drive 1. It's retrying. It's having a hard time reading it, obviously, so well, we don't even know if this disk is good. So let's stick it into drive 1 and see if we can get a directory, drive 0, and get a directory here. Well, I can't read it in that drive either, so the disk must be at fault. All right. Try another disk. Nope, doesn't like any of those disks. However, it does boot up, so there's still hope here. Alright, buddy. Okay. So the machine works. Drives are iffy. But the next order of business is for me to go in and clean up this keyboard. I got to get rid of all of these helper stickers here. Probably means I got to pull all of the keys and get the stickers off, get rid of the sticker residue, and just clean all of the other ones. And don't worry, I'm not going to do that on camera. I'm just going to go in and clean up this keyboard, and we'll put it back into the original machine. So while you're cleaning up the disk, I think I solved two more mysteries. The first one is, why did this machine cease to work after I fixed the power supply? I mean, it shouldn't really have had anything to do with it. But one thing that I was doing at the same time was I was swapping keyboards, and this is where the keyboard plugs in on the side of the machine, and this is of course the keyboard plug. And the wires were routed just like this, and they won't really go behind the connector because it's flush mounted here, so these were kind of hanging in the air and obviously preventing the connector from fully going in, causing some weird connections. Keep in mind that the data bus is on here and part of the address bus is on here when the keyboard is read, so that could have caused some havoc. But after looking at this closely, because obviously this wire has to be rerouted, I noticed that the purple wire looks like it's been, let's see, is that even, looks like it's been pierced right here. So probably that was my fault. While I was plugging in different keyboard connectors or something, the wire got caught and it got pierced, and that means it got connected to one of these lines. And I'm pretty certain that that was the reason why the machine wouldn't boot up anymore. So the way to fix that is I'll put a piece of tape around here, even though it's a minuscule penetration here, but I'll still do it to keep that clean. Tuck things down in here rather than routing it underneath this or to the left of this, routing it here so it's out of the way, and that solves that mystery. Now, mystery number two is, why did all of those disks not work? Yes, of course, we can make an assumption that the drive is bad or dirty and all of that, but then I noticed something on the disk, and that was this. This is where all the screws are. It's very convenient, and it's got, wait for it, a magnetic base. Yep. This was sitting over on that side, and my disks were stacked up on that side too. The disks were in real close proximity to this magnet. So I probably partially erased some of the disks or messed them up, and that's what caused all of that. So let me redo those disks on the good drive on the original system, and then we can go ahead and run our disk drive tests again. But what needs to be done next, of course, is to clean the keyboard, and with that I'm going to close this segment and spend the rest of the night cleaning the keyboard. And what we'll do next time, we'll come back, we'll look at the keyboard, what it looks like, and play with the disk drives, and see if we can get the original machine to properly work with two disk drives. Anyway, I hope you Hope you enjoyed this. Hope it'll help you out when you get your own Model 3. And please support the channel. Subscribe. A thumbs up would be great. And leave me a comment on anything. Again, I read all of the comments. I don't respond to most of them because I don't have the time or they don't seem like they need a response. But rest assured, I do read all of them. And so go ahead and tell me what you think of this episode. And we'll come out with the next one real quick. Hopefully buttoning up the Model 3 for good, at least for the near future. See you later.